tRPC. It's a new way to define and implement Node APIs, and if you've been looking to get into full stack, this may be what you're looking for. Hi, I'm Jack Herrington, a principal full stack software engineer, and on this video, I'm going to break tRPC down for you in 3 steps. The first thing we're going to do is create a Node Express API server and put React on top of it. We'll do that step by step. And then we'll take a look at a NextJS application that has subscriptions and does chat. And of course, all of that is available to you for free on GitHub. And then I'll do some pros and cons at the end where we talk about how tRPC stacks up against our existing API mechanisms. It's fun stuff. Let's jump right into it. Okay, I have an empty directory here called Express React in VS Code, and I'm going to jump over to my gist. This is listed in the description down below, and I'll pull out this package.json. This is basically a mono repo starter. So I'm going to have 2 applications here. The first is a Node Express API server, and the second is our React app. So those are going to need to actually connect, and this is what's going to do that work for us. It's a Yarn workspace based package, but it also works in things like npm, pnpm, or whatever. So I'm going to go up here, create a new file called package.json, and just paste that on in there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is create a directory called packages, and within that packages directory, I'm going to run my npx create mf app. And this is a simple app creator, although it also creates Express servers. So let's give it a try here. I'm going to create one called API server. And it's going to be an API server. It's going to be on port 8080, as they kind of do. And it's just going to be on the Express template. So now we've got that. If we go take a look over here in packages, you can see API server. And all it has is a simple index.ts file, just creates Express, does hello from an API server, and then starts up. Pretty much the most simple API server you can have. All right, now the next thing we want to do is build our React app. So I'm going to do npx again, create mf app, and I'll do client here. And then this is going to be an application. I'll put it on port 3000 and say that we want React, and we'll do TypeScript and Tailwind. Okay, so now we've got these 2 directories over here, API server and client. And what I want to do at this top level is just do yarn, and that's going to go and install the dependencies for both of those applications and get us ready to go. So there's a few more infrastructural things that I need to do before we get started. Of course, all of this code is available to you on GitHub for free. So if you want to just go look there, that's fine. If you want to play along, that's fine too. So but the first thing I need to do is set up some TS configs in both the API server and the client. And the reason being that I just haven't had those added to that automatic template. So we'll just do a tsc init in the API server. That gives us a tsconfig.json with the standard settings. And then I'm going to do the same thing over in the React client. And then finally, there's one small change that I need to make over in tsconfig for React in particular, and that's around JSX. So I need to just say that we are preserving JSX. All right, so now that I've done that, I'm going to go into our API server and I'm going to install our dependencies that we need to run our tRPC server. That includes tRPC server, as well as Zod, which is a way of defining objects, and then cores, because we need to use cores to connect between the React client and our server, since they're going to run on 2 different ports. Now, cores doesn't come with TypeScript types, so I'm going to go and add those as well. And now we can start building our server. Woohoo! So let's go over into our API server, into our index.ts, and I'm going to bring in tRPC. And then with that, I'm going to create a router. So a router is how you manage your routes. And so you can add query routes, which allow you to get data. You can add mutation routes, which allow you to mutate data and send like post requests to the server. And then there's subscription routes, which allow you to subscribe to data over WebSockets. So what I want to do is first build a query route. Just do query here. I'll just say it's hello. And then I need to provide essentially an implementation. So I create an object here. We'll say resolve. And then I'm just going to return the data that I want. So I'm going to say, hello world, as you would expect. And now I need to connect this to Express. So I'm going to bring in the server Express adapter. And down here, where I have my app, I'm going to bring in app.use and then put on the /tRPC route the tRPC express create express middleware. I'm going to give it my app router, and I'm going to give it an empty create context. Now, context is used when you're doing things like authorization. You may go and get the authorization from the header and then pass it along so that each route can get the current user information and make sure that they're getting the right data for that user. We're not going to do that in this case, so I'm just going to keep it at null. Okay, let's actually give this a try. So I'm going to go back up to the root directory here, and then I'm going to do yarn start, and that's actually going to launch both of our applications. It's going to launch our React server up here. Get to see that. It's kind of cool. But what we're really interested in is our 8080. So what we need to do is try out a route here. So where do we put this? Well, we put this on localhost 8080, and then under tRPC, and under hello. There you go. There it is. We've got our result back as the type of data, and it's got hello world. Just like that. How easy is that? So just to create a query, all you've got to do is create a new query here and tell it how you want to resolve. Really cool. So now we want to go and access this query route, hello, from our React client. But I'm not going to be able to do that because the server is going to block connections between port 3000 that has our page and port 8080, which has our API. And the reason for that is security. And the way to get around it is to go and install cores on your server. So I'm going to go and bring in cores here. And then down here, I'm going to just say app.use and give it cores. So now this tRPC mechanism is named tRPC because it's based on TypeScript. And one of the huge values here is that it's end-to-end typed, which means that as I'm over on the client and I'm looking to do the hello query or something like that, it's going to tell me what queries are available and what types I need to send and what types I'm going to get back and all of that. And so in order to do that, we need to expose those types from this API server. And the way that we do that is pretty simple. We just export the type called app router, which is the type of app router. And app router maintains all of the types for those routes. What the routes are, what the routes take as input, and what the types output as output. And then the last thing we need to do is essentially make this a library. So I'm going to go over here to our package.json and say that we have a main, and that main is index.ts. Now we can connect our library of our server to our React app. And the way that we do that is, again, in the console, we'll go into packages, and this time we're going to go into the client, and then we're going to yarn add, and I'm going to make sure to get the exact package name, API server here, put that in there, and then and then the exact version. And this is really important. And then that's going to link these two up and allow me to go get those types from the API server in our client. Pretty cool. So while we're over here on the client, I'm going to go bring in some more dependencies. I'm going to bring in tRPC client as opposed to server. I'm going to bring in the tRPC React bindings as well as React query. React query is going to be the thing that's actually making the query requests and the mutation requests. All right, let's install those. And then I'm going to go back up to my root directory and then do yarn start again. And now let's go over and get our client talking to our API server. So I'm going to go over here to client, go into source, and I'm going to create a new file called trpc.ts. And in there, I'm going to import the create React query hooks helper from tRPC React. That's the thing that's going to help us create the React query hooks that are specific to our API server. And now I want to go bring in that app router that we exposed from our API server, because that's got all the type definitions of what's actually on that API server. And then I want to bring all that together by using create React query hooks on our app router. So we just give it the types there, and we get back this tRPC. Okay, now let's go over and take a look at our app.tsx. And I'm going to go and return out of here because we're going to be doing some queries. And I'm going to call this app content, because what we need to do is we need to wrap this app in a React query context. So from React query, I'm going to bring in the query client and the query client provider. Just going to create a client up here with a new query client. Query client manages all of the caching when it comes to React query. So now down here, I'm going to create a new app, and I'm going to return the app the app content wrapped in one of these query client providers. But I also need a tRPC provider. So I'm going to bring in some code for that. I'm going to create a tRPC client, and I need to bring in tRPC for that. And I'm going to bring in useState so that I can hold that. And now we have our tRPC client. And so I need to put a tRPC provider in there and then give it the client. And I also need to give it the React query client. So I'm going to give it query client and then give it the client that we built up there. All right, so now all of the hard stuff really is done. We've now connected our tRPC client to our tRPC server. And what we need to do is go and make our first query. So I'm going to do that up here. I'm going to say const hello equals, and then do tRPC, and then do use query from within tRPC. So this is like the wrapped React query. And then what do I want to call? I want to call the hello query, just like we created. And let's go get the data. I'm just going to go and replace this right here with a JSON.stringify of our hello.data. Let's take a look. Ta-da! Hello world. Awesome. How cool is that? All right. Now if we go and change it over here in the API server, see hello world 2. All right. Does it change? No, it doesn't change, and that's because the server isn't actually refreshing. And so what I want to do here is make a slight tweak to our server so that it actually refreshes when we make changes to it. And that has nothing really to do with tRPC. It's just a nice kind of developer experience thing. So I'm going to go in here into API server. I'm going to add tsNode dev in development mode. And then over here in the package.json, instead of doing tsNode, I'm going to do tsNode dev. And that just means that every time I make a change to index.ts, it's automatically going to reboot the server. All right, again, let's go back up to the top level directory and then do yarn start. And now I get hello world 2, as you'd expect. But if I make a change, let's see what happens. Hello world 3. Yes, perfection. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've seen how to do a basic query, let's do something a bit more interesting. Let's go build the basics of a chat mechanism. So I'm going to go back over here to our API server. And I'm going to define an interface for a chat message, which has a user and a message, and I'm going to define some basic messages. And then we're going to have a query that allows us to get the messages and an add message mutation that allows us to add a message. All right, so continuing on with our query, I'm just going to chain on another query. We'll call it get messages. And again, we're going to resolve. And we could just return messages here for sure, no problem. Yeah. But what I want to do is I want to show how to use some input. So I'm going to bring in Zod. And with Zod, I'm going to define the types coming in as the input. So let's go here, and I'm going to say the input here is a z.number. So we'll say that it's a number. And if it's not defined, then you'll give it a default value, and that default is 10. And what I'm going to do with this number is basically just give you the last 10 results, unless you specify a number, and then I'll give you that many results. And this comes in as input here. And all I got to do is just say slice and then negative input, and that's going to take the last 10 as opposed to the first 10. All right, so let's try our get messages over on our client. So go back over here to app.ts, and instead of hello, I'll do get messages, and then I'll use get messages data. And there we go. Now we've got our messages. Whoa, cool. And let's see if our slicing thing is working by adding on a little extra data. So I'll just say that I want only the last one. And awesome. We got just the last one. That's great. Okay, cool. All right. So now let me get rid of that because we do actually want, I don't know, a bunch of these. And now we'll create a mutation. Do that much the same way. I'll call that add message. And our input in this case is going to be a Z object. And we'll just resolve with nothing currently, just so it doesn't give us all kinds of red lines. And in this case, what do we have? We have a user and a message. So we're going to have a user, which is a Z string, and a message, which is also a Z string. Cool. All right. And now that we've got that input, I'm just going to add that input to that array, and then I'm going to return the input. All right. Now over on the app side, I'm going to go and bring in use mutation for add message. And then I'm going to add an on add, which calls that mutate. This is standard React query stuff. gives it the message and gives it the user. And then I'll just go and add a button down here that will go and add that message. So let's give it a try. So now it's add a message, hit refresh, and there we go. Now I've got a new message in there from Jack, hello world, and then go and make another one, yo world, hit refresh, hit add message, and now I've got yo world as well. Very cool. So now, of course, we want to go and automatically do that query. So we're going to add some options to our on add and just say, on success, we are going to invalidate the query get messages. And now if I add another one, let's say yo world again, if I hit add message, it automatically invalidates the get messages query, which forces it to requery after a successful add message. All right, now to make this a little bit nicer, let's go and add some state for user and message, and then add some input fields for that. And I'll put these down here. And these are just basic input fields. Type is text, value is the whatever it is, user. We're gonna set the user. We got some nice tailwind in there, and then a placeholder, and the same sort of thing for message. And we can just now replace the message with message, and the user with the user. And now I've got this, and I can say, yeah, Jack, hello there, from an input, hit add message, and there you go, cool. And I guess the last thing I would kind of do before kind of leaving this up to you to play with is make this a slightly nicer output. I'll just take this messages data, say that if it's not there, then it's an array, and then map it, and then we'll have a row, I guess. And then within that, I'll do a row or give it, I don't know, message or something. And then JSON stringify that. Cool. And now you have kind of a basic chat mechanism. You want to go format it and show it a different way. That's awesome. Now let's go take a look at the kind of completed NextJS version of this that uses another outstanding feature of tRPC, and that's subscriptions. Okay, so here is the completed NextJS app. It's very similar to what we had before. You can do, hey or hello, whatever you want, hit return, and that automatically sends out something. But instead of using that invalidate query mechanism like we had in the original example, this one is using subscriptions, which means WebSockets, and means that it's absolutely real time. When a new message comes in, it gets posted across that WebSocket, and then when there's no new messages, nothing happens on that WebSocket. And so what you get is a real-time mechanism without polling, which is super cool. Now, if you think I'm super smart or whatever for having built this, I'm really not. I went over and built out this example by taking the Prisma E2E testing, ESLint, auth with NextAuth, WebSocket, and subscription report support based on Next.js. And I basically carved out all of the EDE testing, ESLint, auth using NextAuth, and Prisma, because I really wanted to boil it down to the basics, which was just the WebSockets and subscription support within Next.js, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I've actually kind of made this example somewhat worse, I guess, from a certain point of view. But you can always start with this and get all of that great stuff. So let's go take a look over at the code. Now, the place that I want to start is over in our server. And we can see that we have a get message, very similar to what we had before. You see we had an add message, pretty much exactly the same as we had before, but in this case, we have something a little bit new. We've got this event emitter down here. And when we go and add a new message, we're posting essentially an add message saying, hey, there's a new message. And then we've got this subscription down here, which is another thing you can do from the client. And when you subscribe to a particular event. So in this case, on add, and then you get back a subscription. And this subscription is also watching on that event emitter. So it's saying, when I get an add, I'm then going to call this function here on add, and I get given an emitter, which emits from my subscription. And then I'm going to send along that data from that subscription. And then when the subscription goes away and unsubscribes, then I'm going to unsubscribe from that event emitter. Now that event emitter is a very basic event emitter from Node.js, and all we're doing is just creating that event emitter. You just create it, you post events to it, you can listen to it. Just a very nice loose coupling mechanism. The only downside is in this case, you really only can support one server with this because this is an in-memory event emitter. And that means that if I connect to a different server, I'm not going to know that you sent me a message. So what you might need to do is use something like RabbitMQ to get these talking together. All right, let's go over to the client and take a look to see how the client has changed to do this subscription stuff. So the first thing we're going to do in our client is get the initial messages, just like we did before. And then we are going to precede some state that we have those subscribed messages with that data that we got back from the initial query. And then we are going to set up that subscription to onAdd. And when we get a value, we're just going to go and add on the new message to all of the existing messages using the set state version where we take the current value and we return a new value. And then when it comes to actually adding the message, it's exactly the same thing as we had before. We have our state, we have our add message, and then when we see a message and it's big enough, then we go and fire off that mutation. And then once that's done, then we set the current message to empty string so that we are ready to add yet another string to our chat. And then the only other thing you need to do when it comes to doing subscriptions is to use WebSockets as opposed to HTTP. And to do that, you use the tRPC client links with WSLink and create WS client. And then down here in this get ending link, we create the WebSockets client and return the WebSocket link, which we then use within this with tRPC as the get ending link. So it's actually a little bit complex for sure, but the nice thing is that there is an example code that is available to you on GitHub from the really good tRPC documentation site. All right, so now that we know a little bit more about tRPC and how to do queries and mutations and set up a server, and of course now set up some subscriptions, let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of tRPC versus REST, GraphQL, and gRPC. So starting with REST. So REST is a vaguely defined standard. It's not even actually a standard. It is an architectural style that defines how you structure your URLs to find entities, and then the operations that you can perform on those entities, like put and post, delete, and get. Now, most folks don't actually use it like that. They go and add on a reporting mechanism for efficiency's sake, and that really is an RPC mechanism. So I think the pro of REST, or what I would call REST Plus, because people add on top of it this reporting mechanism, is that it's familiar. But the downside is that it's not a standard. That means that the clients aren't standardized, and it means that there's a lot of work in setting up the standards for yourself or for your business when it comes to how you structure the REST responses and how you do paging and all of that. All right, now let's talk about GraphQL. So the huge pro when it comes to GraphQL is that it very much is a standard. The clients are standardized, and so that's created a fantastic ecosystem around GraphQL. The downside when it comes to GraphQL is you have to learn the GraphQL syntax. And I think a lot of folks find that alien and daunting, and it's kind of a gating factor to getting into GraphQL. And then there's gRPC. Now, gRPC is a remote procedure call, or RPC mechanism, that uses a binary format to talk between the client and the server. And so you set up these protos that define the structure of what you're going to send along the line. And then you've got code on the client that can format the data into buffers and send them along, and it's very, very efficient. So that's the huge pro when it comes to gRPC. The downside is also the same, that you have a binary mechanism here, so you can't actually look at the wire and see, as we can in mechanisms like these, what the format is that's being transferred around. In this case, it's basic JSON with tRPC. When it comes to gRPC, it's a binary method, so you're going to need special tooling to see the content and to analyze it. And there's also some versioning issues there when it comes to different versions of that binary content. So let's talk about some pros and cons when it comes to tRPC. The simplicity of tRPC to me is a huge win. It feels very native. You're not having to learn a new GraphQL style syntax for this. The format going across the wire is JSON, just like we've been used to, but there's more structure to it. Another nice thing is you get that end-to-end typing, which is a huge win, particularly when you use systems like Prisma in conjunction with this. You're getting typing all the way from the database all the way through to the client, and that's just phenomenal. But the only con that I can think of right now is that this just isn't something that folks are using in a wide scale as of yet. So get out there and try it. I think this is really cool stuff. And particularly if you're someone who's just getting in to doing the full stack thing, I think this is a fantastic entry point. So you should try this out. Pull down the code here from GitHub, take a look at the examples that are on the tRPC documentation site, and try it out for yourself. All right, well, I hope you've learned a little bit about tRPC, how to use it in its simple form, how to do cool stuff like subscriptions, how it compares to the other tools that we have today. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, be sure to put those in the comment section down below. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you really like the video, hit the subscribe button and click on that bell, and you'll be notified the next time a new Blue Collar Coder comes out.